He was fired at, burned with cigarette butts, pierced with a nail in his right foot, and severely beaten with an electric baton. The wounds and bruise marks visible on his body is a testimony of the brutality he was subjected to by the Chinese authorities.
In Russia, they don't allow protest except for free speech zones. The United States has adopted that. In communist China, they only allow authorized demonstrations. We now have the same system here. And if you notice, our media doesn't criticize Russia's tyranny or China's oppression anymore, because they would look like hypocrites if they did. In the past, our government would criticize the North Vietnamese or the North Koreans or Fidel Castro for torturing people. Now, you don't hear them criticizing authoritarians and despots around the world, because our government is doing everything that dictators do, as if they're going down a checklist of every horrible thing that corrupt regimes do, and trying to even go further than tyrants have in the past.
George Bush was correct when he indicated that the Constitution is only a piece of paper. And if people do not know the ideas, if they don't read the Constitution, if those ideas are not protected and enforced, then the Constitution could theoretically be a perfect piece of paper with perfect ideas, and they would be irrelevant. If you want to know how much protection the Constitution gives you, I challenge you to stand on a railroad track with a train coming and hold up a copy of the Constitution as your protection. And you will discover in very short order that the Constitution will afford you essentially no protection whatsoever.
No, absolutely not. I will never take a mandatory vaccination. Ever, ever, ever.
Well, I might not know exactly what I do until that time comes, but I can tell you this, I wouldn't be taking the vaccine, and there might be shooting that day.
That's why there's 200 million guns in the United States. I mean, I've got, we are the ones, I truly believe we are the ones as individuals who can make the best determinations for what's best for our families. No third party, no interest that has any other interest but your interest is going to be able to make those decisions on your behalf. And if you cede those decisions onto somebody else, then you are risking extermination ultimately. And so if that's the case, then I'm going to do what I need to do to protect my family.
Well, we don't know that. That's another big question and problem with the bigger question that we're discussing here, and that is the increased level of control by the federal government to dictate to citizens everything. It's incrementally that we go down the path. But when that time comes, the big question is, what's the state going to do? And so I finally decided and realized we needed a process in our state, and I think every state needs this, to be able to address that. So I've introduced another bill that will address that problem of how do legislators, how do the people quickly, efficiently react to unconstitutional acts that the federal government takes. We talked about putting teeth in the Constitution by funneling the federal tax dollars through the state, then the state could pass it on. We also need a mechanism in which state legislators can easily bring a question before the House or the Senate, the legislature, address that issue that's unconstitutional, they believe is unconstitutional, and then be able to address it publicly, openly, and vote it up or down.
Again, I sincerely hope that our government has not gotten so corrupt that we have government agents in this country willing to come to my door armed, with the intention of incarcerating me and giving me some mandatory vaccination, because I will resist with every ounce of force that I am capable of generating, which is considerable. My very first question during my presidential campaign was relative to the anthrax scare that was prevalent at the time. And the question was, Mr. Badnarik, what is your position on mandatory vaccinations? And because I was very new at a new candidate, I hadn't learned how to couch my answers diplomatically. As an engineer, under moments of stress, I still blurted out the truth. And my answer to the question was, you bring the syringe, I'll bring my .45, and we'll see who makes a bigger hole.
Well, the Second Amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and that leaves them with the authority and the power to be the last say-so in fighting off tyrannical government. And the one thing that the Democrats and the liberals and a lot of people make a mistake about is that the first part of the Second Amendment, where it says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, some people think that the reference to militia is talking about the Army or the National Guard. Well, there's two things wrong with that. The National Guard wasn't formed until 100 years later, and the Founding Fathers didn't even like the idea of a standing army. So they certainly weren't guaranteeing the right of soldiers to keep and bear arms.
The discussion, they say, well, they never envisioned machine guns, and yet they did have weapons that were capable of firing multiple rounds at once. In fact, they were experimental, but they did exist. They knew about them. Personally, I think it's one of those balance issues, that if a person can engage their target.
Well, the Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't specify what type of arms, and it doesn't specify pistols, shotguns, rifles, assault rifles, whatever. It says arms. So I think what you just described there, the fact that a populace should be able to defend itself from their government, if necessary, includes the right to have any sort of weapon that the federal government or any government has.
I draw my line in the sand when I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, and I can feel it and see it, taste it, that my rights are being violated. That's when I take a stand.
Would you be willing to be force vaccinated?
No.
Then would you be willing to go to a quarantine camp?
No.
What do you plan to do if they come knocking on your door?
Well, you know, you bring your syringe, I'll bring my 40.
Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for electing me to another term as sheriff. I want you to know that I appreciate it, and that I will continue to do my best to make this city and, well, to make this county a place where we can be proud to raise our children.
The most powerful public servant in the county, who is the sheriff. The sheriff can kick the feds out of their county. The sheriff is the most powerful individual. But instead, they've been taught that they have no power. And in many states, they're getting rid of the sheriff or turning the sheriff into a creature of the state or a creature of the city. Cities are chartered by the state under the rules of the state and the county. So again, it's backwards.
That the sheriffs in this country really take their job seriously in protecting and serving the people of their county. And yes, the best protection you can give your people, Sheriff, is protection from tyrants. And my question is, Sheriff, will you stand against tyranny? If you won't, then you're not doing your job.
You can move out in the middle of the desert and get together with a couple hundred of your friends and found a city. You could hire your own police. You can go set up speed traps out on the highway and pull over unsuspecting families that are out there, you know, driving by as tourists. But the minute you start violating the county laws and the state laws, you are involved in criminal activity. The cities are simply incorporations. And so they are trying to overthrow the sheriffs, they are trying to overthrow the legislatures through these agreements they're signing with the federal government and the United Nations.
We've always been swindled in one way or another. We just refuse to accept that it's happening again. You know, we get trusting. And, you know, between COINTELPRO, Project Megiddo, you know, this is just another example of it with the Obama White House.
A lot of people get confused. They think that communism is for the people. But if you study history